Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast episode. Today we have a very special guest, Shaarika Kaul, and I'm very excited because of her background. Like when I looked at her LinkedIn, I was like, whoa, how are you doing all of this at the same time? And then actually in this particular episode, you're gonna learn more about her as a person and even like why she's so actually active about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So without further ado, we're gonna go right into it.
It's very sweet. I'm excited too. Thank you for having me on the show. And it's great to connect with you again after quite a while.
Mm-hmm. So first thing, Shaarika, do you mind introducing yourself, either like about your background or your interest?
Yeah, so my name is Shaarika Kaul. I am a Seattleite. I've lived in the Seattle area since I was 5 years old. Before that, we were in New York for a couple of years, and then I was actually born in London. I was raised in a very loud and proud Indian family. We're Kashmiri Pundits from the north, so super into our heritage. Gosh, what else is there about me? I grew up kind of in the arts. I have always loved music. That's kind of one thing people don't know about me is I'm actually a musician. I grew up playing the cello. I played the piano for a while. And I was also trained in Indian classical music in the Hindustani style, which is the North Indian style. And I was very passionate about drama as well. So the stage has been my stage, for lack of a better term. That's I really feel like I grew up on the stage, and that gave me a huge sense of confidence and self-expression. That's kind of a little bit about me.
Wow, I didn't even know you were born in London. And where exactly were you raised in New York?
So I lived in Scarsdale, so kind of like Greenville. So, and it's kind of near Westchester. But yeah, that was the area that I grew up in. And basically our whole family, if they're not in India, they are on the East Coast. So we used to go like every other day to like Connecticut or New Jersey or wherever, just around kind of the tri-state area, just visiting family on the weekends. And that's one of the things that I really missed. I remember when we moved to Seattle, because it was just us in this area. So we were kind of pioneers on the West Coast.
Do you think you'd ever come back to the East Coast, or you like where you are in Seattle?
Honestly, I think I consider Seattle my home now. I think for a long time, because I was so used to the way of life in New York and kind of the way people were, it was a big cultural adjustment. And I remember when I first moved here, I was one of very few people of color at my school. So that was also, a big shift from, New York. I mean, you can't cross the street without hearing like 5 different languages. So that was something that was very different for me. And there was definitely, difficulties that I dealt with, kind of making that adjustment. But I think, it really toughened me up and really made me into who I am. So I love coming to New York, though. I love visiting. I have so many friends and family who live there. So New York is still a huge part of my heart. But I think now that I've lived in Seattle for, I think, almost 18 years now, it's home.
So this is actually a question I ask in every podcast episode to everyone is, if you had all the time in the world, what would you be doing?
Oh, easy, music. I'm really passionate about music. I started with some friends in college, an Eastern and Western fusion band. And I played the cello, a little bit of piano, kind of like I mentioned, and then I sing. So I think what I would want to do is pick up some more instruments. I've really wanted to learn piano better, as well as pick up guitar. And I feel like I just haven't been as committed to my music as I would like to be. And I studied Indian classical music specifically for many, many years. And I feel like I want to get back into it more. So definitely music.
Do you think that in the future, you'd rather have it stay as a hobby or maybe something else in the future?
I think I'm okay with it being a hobby. I think, I really love music, and I do it because it makes me happy, not necessarily because I think I'm the best in the world. And there are always things that you can do, especially in kind of the world we live in, where, I could make a YouTube channel and, post the music that I do. I can start a Spotify. I feel like there's so many amazing ways where you can have a side gig that's very, very, viable and realistic, and you can enjoy yourself doing it like you do. You're a full-time consultant, but you have this amazing YouTube channel where you share your tips and tricks. I think that's awesome.
Thank you. So this is actually probably a lot more broad question, but what are your aspirations in life, whether it be your career, personal, or even about music or Mindful Mansi?
Oh, wow, that's loaded. It's funny. So one of the things that I actually, I experienced kind of two very difficult things in the pandemic. So one thing was I lost my job at Deloitte. Consulting went through, as you know, horrible time. And I was, the junior most person on my team. So I got let go. And I remember that I was not expecting that. And I was expecting that I would stick around at Deloitte for a couple years at least, and continue down the path I was going. So that was difficult. And then in the pandemic, I also, we lost two people. I lost an uncle who's like a dad to me. And then my partner lost his dad. So I think the pandemic, having those experiences, it makes you remember what's really important in life. And I think as far as, aspirations, my aspiration, I think, is to always be near my family, and to always stay connected with them. And, my uncle and I, we were very, very close. So I feel really grateful that I had such a wonderful person in my life. And that's why it hurt so much to lose him. But I think, aspirations, definitely family. I would love to be a mom and have kids, and I think career-wise, that's the one that I'm thinking about right now. Because, at first, like I said, I was at Deloitte and I was like, okay, this is where I'm going to be for a long, long time. And that all changed. So it made me also reassess how, when you're young, life always goes according to plan. Maybe you're in high school, then you're like, okay, I want to go to college. So you go to college, you get into your major. And then you're like, okay, I'm in my senior year, I have to apply for jobs. And then you study for the interviews and then you get the job and everything just goes so according to plan. And I'm a big planner. And this is the first time in my life where I feel like things didn't go according to plan. And I'm kind of learning to be okay with that. It's an adjustment, but, I do really enjoy product management, product work, working with engineering teams. So that's I see myself very much in that technical realm in the future.
Wow, that's a very scary experience. I know, I like to plan my life very far in advance. And now I'm just like, oh, maybe I should reevaluate. Do I really want to plan that far out? Or maybe I should just kind of plan for spontaneity and kind of enjoy life a little bit. But wow, that's definitely a big story to tell. So thank you so much for sharing.
Of course. Yeah. And I think I'm not the only one who's going through it. I think a lot of people are dealing with grief of many kinds right now, whether that's, losing a job, losing a family member, the state of, our country. There's a lot going on. And I think that's why for me, empathy is really important because you really never know what other people are going through and how the world is affecting them. So,
yeah. So a question I want to ask is, what is something most people don't know about you?
Ooh, okay. I think one that people don't always know is that I'm actually very spiritual. I meditate every single day. I was raised in a Hindu family. And it's interesting because when I talk about Hinduism, a lot of people, it's considered a religion, but the way that I grew up with it really was more of a way of life. And meditation, and, reciting mantras and stuff, that was very much a part of the way of life that I was raised with. So, meditating every single day. It really, really keeps me centered.
I mean, that kind of brings into the next question is what or who shaped you to who you are today? Do you think actually that was a big part of who you are today? Or, I mean, not even just in tech, but as a person?
Yeah. So I would say who and what shaped me is my parents, number one.
Okay.
I'm very, very lucky to have the parents that I have. And, parents aren't always perfect. They're people too. And my family has definitely been through our fair share of rough times, just like everyone else's family has. But I think I really, really admire how strong my parents are. And, they were immigrants and they came here, worked super, super hard to get to where they are now. And I'm really, really proud to be their child. And I think, those experiences where we had difficult times were things that really shaped me and brought me a lot of kind of wisdom. Maybe at a younger age than, you would expect.
Yeah.
So I feel like the way that my parents raised me, to be very proud of my heritage, to make sure that I am, maintaining a strong connection with my own self, and to persevere and work hard. Those were really big things that shaped me, and also to have fun.
So what would you say was the biggest lesson you learned from them then?
Biggest lesson that I learned from them, I think the biggest thing, and I talked about this earlier, was empathy. My parents are really kind, loving, wonderful people. And I think one of the biggest things that, I always noticed growing up was, one of the things, they came from India. And I remember when they came to the US, they were like, I don't understand how a country can be so wealthy and there are people sleeping out on the streets. And my dad, I remember when we were kids, whenever we would see someone who was homeless, we would always keep like snack bars in our car, or water bottles, and we would always give them to the homeless people. And my dad would look at me and my brother and he would say, when you guys become successful, you need to do something about this.
Wow.
The whole point of, for them coming into the world is just, discover yourself and grow and learn, but it's to also give back to other people. So that's something that's always been very, very important to me.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah. I have some pretty awesome parents. They're pretty neat.
Yeah, I think it's because I live in New York, so everyone, if they see a homeless guy, they just walk right past, but your parents are completely different from that.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common thing, and I think it affects a lot of people when they see a homeless person for the first time. It's painful and it hurts, and I think that part of what my parents have always wanted for me and my brother is to make the world a better place, and so that's something that's really important to me. And as I get older, I'm trying to find more and more ways where I can engage with work like that.
Yeah, and I can definitely tell you have been trying.
Yeah, I'm figuring it out.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to go right into talking about your career a little bit. So
Yeah.
I noticed you studied both informatics, data science, and communications at University of Washington. Why did you study what you studied? Because to me, I think they're completely different. But now that I'm hearing your story, it makes sense actually why you decide to do that.
Yeah, so the interesting thing was I was always a people person. I love people performing. So communications was like a no-brainer for me. I specialized in public speaking, and that was just, I loved that major. The classes, just everything was so wonderful. And I had amazing, amazing professors. Informatics was actually, I didn't necessarily see myself in STEM when I was growing up. And, but I always remembered that, I would always be the one fixing the computer or fixing the printer, or if something wasn't working, even when I was really little, my parents would be like, can you figure this out? Like, do you know what's going on? So I had some sort of problem solving thing in the back of my head, but I think, whether that's because of maybe it was just me thinking like, oh, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a real math and science kind of person. So I just never imagined it. But I remember when I took my first course with a really dear professor, Dave Stearns, on our first informatics class, he was like, we don't need more people who can code. We need more people who can make technology work better for other people. And that just blew my mind, because I really never saw a space for someone like me who's, really human oriented. I like to interact, I don't like to sit in my silo and on my computer all day. I think that was kind of what really changed my mind. And I worked hard. I mean, computer science classes were not easy for me. It did not come naturally. And I think there was a lot of also kind of, at UW, everyone wants to study computer science. So, there was a very competitive nature. There were also, being, a girl in that environment, definitely did not always feel welcomed in it, to be honest. But I worked really hard and I pushed through, especially once I found product management, and I realized I had this oh my God, this is what I want to do. I love this, working with stakeholders, working with technical people. This is it, being the glue. That's what I call it, is being the glue. And I realized that's what I want to do. So I grinded through it, and I had amazing classmates especially once I got into my major, who were really, compassionate and who were just amazing. I think you find your crew, and I definitely found my crew. And I never wanted to kind of be put into one box. I think I've always kind of been like that. I'm kind of like, I like to do my thing. So I wanted to do informatics, and I did it. I did communications as well. And then I also minored in business. So it kind of became this nice little circle of kind of tech consulting / product, which worked out.
Yeah, actually, like when I was looking into a career in tech, I was like, I don't come from a coding background. I actually tried coding and I was like, oh, it's just not for me. I don't find it interesting to sit here for 8 hours a day to do the same thing. And maybe it's not even 8 hours, probably more than that. But I had the same exact epiphany as you. I was actually thinking about product management, tech consulting, or just completely like project management. So all those three were the reasons why I was even considering anything where it's like in between tech and business. And it looks like you also found that same epiphany too. And I know we're going to go into this a little bit later about the difference between the two, but what exactly about technology excites you?
I think it's just the ability to solve people's problems. I think it's just if you look at just the kinds of products that are out there, there are things like Be My Eyes, where I was just watching a YouTube video about a young woman who's blind, and I think she has like a makeup channel on YouTube, and she talks about how, you know, she can use an app and a person will come on and like explain to her what's going on around her.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what the heck? Like, that's so cool. And like the fact that I can like pick up a phone and, you know, if I'm not feeling well one day and I need to order myself some chicken soup, I can do that. I feel like it's just in a lot of ways being able to make life more convenient and easier for people just excites me about it. I mean, there's a dark side to it too.
Yeah.
Which we could get into later. But I think it's just so amazing how you can affect so much change with just kind of like a click of a button. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I feel like most people at this point probably take that for granted. Like when you just mentioned about ordering chicken soup, like I do that almost every day now. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about it. No.
Yeah. And I think especially because when we were growing up, you know, we had technology. It's not like we didn't, but I feel like, you know, like when we were little, you know, we had like AOL email and, you know, really fat phones and stuff. And when I kind of look at the kids now, I mean, I'm only 24. I don't know what I'm saying, the kids, but when I look at them now and there's like technology all around them, screens, everything, I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is a very different reality that we have these days.
The next question is really, we did briefly talk about this too, is why did you decide on Deloitte and consulting? So it made like a really good sense about informatics and communications and then your minor in business for consulting. But why was that the one that you end up choosing over product management, and also why Deloitte specifically?
Yeah, so actually consulting came really randomly in my life, actually. So it was completely random. My mom was actually a management consultant. So she was super excited when I, you know, got Deloitte. She was like, you're following my footsteps. And I'm like, yes, mother. But yeah, so I remember I was prepping for product management interviews. And those are pretty grueling, pretty tough, pretty competitive, just like consulting ones are. And I remember I was just like, I had gotten an email from my department and they were like, hey, you know, we have the Deloitte applications are closing on this day, like apply. And, you know, and I was like, oh, okay, I mean, this seems kind of cool. I applied and I looked at kind of the interview materials and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of similar to the stuff I was doing for product management, like cases and things like that. And it's a little different. But I was like, yeah, I mean, this seems cool. And then I interviewed and I ended up, you know, doing well. And it just happened. So it was definitely, I know a lot of people, you know, have a story where they were like, it was my dream and I got to it. And for me, I'm just like, it landed on me. I'm like, cool, I like it.
So speaking of consulting, one of your clients was actually a big 5 tech company. So really curious about that experience because it's probably a lot more interesting working in tech with a big tech company. So, and you were based in Seattle, but this company was based in like, you know, California, like all the other ones. But how was that experience?
You know, it's kind of interesting because I feel like my tech consulting experience was kind of kind of unorthodox. So I did, development and stuff in college because that was part of my major. But I had kind of, like I said earlier, I didn't really have the intention of going into software development. And then I got brought on as a software developer to the technology project. And a lot of people will kind of be like, oh, but like, why would a big 5 tech company with like the most brilliant developers ever like need to, like outsource or, get help? And it's often because, consulting, for a big company, hiring people is like a fixed kind of, it's a capex, whereas consultants are opex. So we can come in and, one of my managers, the thing he told me was, what we tell these companies is that our devs are as good as yours, but they're going to work harder than yours. So, so that was kind of what my experience was kind of actually, becoming a dev in an environment. And I was a junior level dev. So it's not like I was, writing the craziest stuff you've ever heard of. But yeah, that was a big part of it. And I expressed to my manager as well that I'm really interested in kind of technical program management and product management. So he kind of brought me on as kind of his associate or kind of junior TPM. So I kind of juggled both roles, and I was also doing like data analytics and dashboarding. So I feel like I had a very good manager who was like, you seem to have a lot of interest, give them a try, see what you like, see how it works out. So that was, and which is interesting because I think a lot of times when you're in consulting, especially tech consulting, it is you get really good at a certain technology. Like for me, I was in the cloud practice at Deloitte. So I got like Azure certified, and your role is to help implement that for clients. So it was kind of interesting that I kind of got brought onto a very deeply like technical, like coding level role. Yeah, it was kind of interesting experience.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, why would a big tech company hire a tech consultant? Like as a tech consultant, I kind of understand, but I'm always curious about like the intellectual property. Like maybe that could be something why they're a little bit scared. Like, oh, maybe not. Yeah,
I think it's, you have like NDAs and like things like things that you sign. And, I think, as well as I do, like in consulting, like, some clients are okay if you talk about them, some are not. And the rule of thumb that I always follow is just like, rather be safe than sorry. So like, I don't overshare about who I've worked with and what I've done with them. I just keep it at a very general level, if anything. And usually, that's fine. They're not gonna run after you unless you really do something crazy.
So I'm actually kind of curious about this, but when you were there, was it kind of like you were treated like an employee, or they knew you were a consultant and treated you like a consultant?
Yeah, they were actually very nice. And even I'm at another big 5 tech company now with my current client. I think they're very nice about treating you like an employee. Like you get like most of the same perks, like, you get to go to the cafeteria and get all the fun food, and, the food was very good. That I have to give them. And you get to go to, the different campuses, you get to take the transport. Obviously, there's certain perks that we don't get. And I think there are expectations, and this is with any kind of consulting role, is that we're paying you to do this, so you need to do it well and you need to do it right. So there is a little bit of that. And especially when you're at a company that is already so high caliber, I think that can make you feel a lot of pressure. Like I remember when I first got brought onto the project, I was like, oh my God, I'm like literally just out of college. Like, why do they want me to work and do these things and implement this stuff? I was like, are you guys crazy? But it ended up working out. But I think for the most part, the clients that I have worked with, they're really nice. They're all like super chill, super fun people, but there is that expectation that, again, like we're paying you to do a good job and to lend your expertise. And if it's, there is a high expectation of your work.
Okay. So for anyone who is like in their first year or first month of consulting, like what advice would you give for them?
I think be flexible and be a sponge. For me, I mean, certainly my first thing at consulting did not turn out as I planned. Like I didn't expect I would be writing code, but I was like, and I remember I was super freaked out about it because, writing code was never my strong suit, but I was like, you know what, this opportunity has been given my way and I'm just going to do my best. And I think a lot of times, people also understand that, you're junior, this is your first job. They only expect that you are attentive and that you're learning. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is just like always take notes. if you don't know what to do with yourself, just take notes because you never know. And then slowly, you'll find yourself kind of growing into shoes and becoming, a really strong contributor on your project. Within, I think three months, maybe less than that, I became a pretty strong contributor on my first project. And you'll find yourself growing. You'll find yourself getting pushed and, maybe pulled in different directions, but you will figure out how to manage it. And the other big thing too is, especially when you're in like a big four, make sure that you're setting your boundaries. In my opinion, I feel like, that there are obviously always going to be nights where, hey, maybe, you have to be on until like 11 or, 12, just because you have a big deadline or something important to get done. But I think for the most part, I encourage people to be very strict about, okay, it's 5 p.m. I'm done. Unless it's an emergency, or unless, maybe you started at 11 a.m. that day, then, fine, if you want to go till 7 p.m. Yeah, sure. But I think my main advice is, take notes, be flexible, just absorb and take whatever comes your way, and then set your boundaries.
Mm-hmm. So because you probably didn't expect to be in a coding role, did Deloitte give you all the resources and training you needed, or did you have to learn everything kind of on the spot?
I think, what's funny is Deloitte has its own kind of division of folks who are brought on because of their development and et cetera expertise. I'm not sure if there's like a boot camp involved in that, but Deloitte kind of has their own thing for that. And I was on the consulting side. So I was kind of like brought in almost to another sector, which is pretty common in consulting firms, as people work across different teams and different groups. And I didn't exactly get training, to be honest. It was mostly like, they were like, okay, well, it seems like you have basic to medium understanding of this coding framework or this language. So come on over and do it. It was kind of trial by fire. And I remember the first week that I onboarded, my teammates were like, yeah, so we're going on vacation, so good luck. And I was like, what? I'm not kidding. They were very kind, and they taught me as much as I could. But again, I think people recognize that, like, okay, this is literally like a junior level person. I was so freaked out, but I realized, what, they brought me on for a reason. Take a breather, just do your best. So I think for me, it was trial by fire completely. But there's a lot of good learning in that.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of interesting because you were like not only trying out your first job out of college, you were learning how to code a little bit more, working with a big client. And then on top of that, you also founded a startup and wrote a book called Mindful Mansi. Can you tell us about that? Because that's the part that blew my mind. I was like, right after college, like that's what you did. I was like,
Yeah, so I can absolutely tell you about that. So Mindful Mansi is a book about a young South Asian girl who is learning how to kind of deal with her feelings and her emotions in a kind of a more positive way. So I know when I was growing up, I talk about how I grew up in a very spiritual family. So things like meditation, yoga was very much kind of central to the way that we were brought up. And that was very important to us. And I definitely have struggled with my mental health. And I noticed how having those tools, like knowing how to do certain breathing exercises, knowing how to meditate, really helped me come back to my center, especially in college when I had really, really severe anxiety. And I was just thinking that, like, I feel so lucky that I have these opportunities and I have this knowledge, that I want other kids to be introduced to it too. So when I was in my senior year, I was in the business program, which is, it's the entrepreneurship/business minor. And there's a class where you start your own company. And I met another lovely girl named Aubrey Unamori, who is my co-author, and a couple of other folks. And they were all really interested in writing a children's book. And I was like, I would love to. So I ended up joining their group, and it really just spun out from there. And Aubrey and I wrote the book together, and we have a really wonderful illustrator, Andy Curtis, who, I mean, she just brought the book to life. Like, it's amazing what she did with it. But yeah, it came out of there. And, we kept running it, even after we graduated. We were doing, read alouds and book fairs. And so that's still going, and that's my side gig. And the book is self-published, but we are looking to send it over to some bigger publishers and see kind of where it goes. It was we knew that we wanted a couple of things. So one thing, we knew we wanted it to have kind of a focus on kind of mental health and emotional well-being, and kind of mindfulness.
Okay.
The other thing was, we found this really interesting kind of statistic that children's books are more likely to have an animal as a main character than a person of color. And that just kind of blew my mind. And we were like, we need to do something about this. And I think especially because, a lot of kind of what today we know as mindfulness, like certain like meditative practices and certain breathing exercises, yoga, things like that tend to come from Eastern cultures. I think, we wanted to kind of share our experience with that part of our culture. Yep. And Aubrey's Buddhist, I'm Hindu. So we grew up with a similar concept of spirituality and similar way of life. So I think we really wanted to bring that focus to kind of the Asian roots of a lot of the practices. That's not to say that all practices come from Asian roots, but I think that was something that was really important to us, was kind of in a way kind of telling our narrative, like telling our own narrative as Asian women.
Mm-hmm. So what exactly is on the horizon for Mindful Mansi? So I know Mansi, I think, is that what you said?
Yeah, Mansi.
Okay, Mindful Mansi. So you did say something about like book fairs and read alouds, but how did that change during the pandemic?
So yeah, definitely the physical stuff is not happening. We did have a really exciting opportunity where there was a local nonprofit who we donated kind of several copies of our book to, because as part of their mental health initiative, as well as, kind of staying involved, especially with kind of the Asian and South Asian communities in the area. And then also, pursuing publishing with a bigger publisher. So that's kind of how we've been doing things for now. But I think, we were really glad when we got reached out to by a nonprofit, saying, hey, we think that the concepts your books teach are really great and especially needed in the time like this where, kids, it's very difficult for them to understand what's going on. And it can be really anxiety inducing for them. So that's kind of I think the biggest way in which Mindful Mansi has kind of been still kind of making some waves in the world. But yeah, next step is, publishing. So we're hoping that we can, find a bigger publisher to kind of, take Mansi forward too.
So do you think you would ever leave your job in product management and consulting to pursue more on Mindful Mansi?
I don't think I would leave my job for it, at least, not at this point. If Mindful Mansi became like a giant success and they were like, we want 5 more books, that's something to think about. But I think I kind of take each step as it comes. And yeah, we shall see. But I'm really happy with kind of like, we were talking about earlier, is having your side gig that makes you happy, makes you feel fulfilled outside of your regular work, which may also make you happy and fulfilled. But people are so complicated and we have all these different things that are important to us. So I think for now, I'm happy with the side gig. And if it gets to the point where they want 20 more books, we'll think about it then.
Okay. And also, where can we actually buy the book?
So you can actually buy it at, so we have a website, mindfulmansi.com. And right now we're not selling it through the website, but we do have, there's this amazing service called Lulu. And there's a link to it on the website. So if you go to mindfulmansi.com, you can find the link. And they actually print our books and they distribute them as well. So that's the best way to find Mindful Mansi.
Okay. And the link will be down below as well.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you for sharing.
Yep. So currently you are now at AG Consulting Partners. So I'm very curious because I saw you were both a technical product manager and a management consultant. How did that work out? Like, is that something that they hired you for, or you decided to do one over the other?
Yeah. So the way that AG works is it has kind of multiple different like titles and roles and positions. So my technical title at AG Consulting is management consultant. Is a consultant. So that's my title. AG kind of has two really interesting ways that it approaches things. Is it has kind of this expert workforce, and it has a management consulting workforce. So the expert workforce is for folks who really want to focus and dig deep into their client deliverables. So oftentimes at big consulting companies, that'll kind of be referred to as a specialist role.
Yep.
And then the consulting role is more kind of, you are doing the client stuff as well, but there's also kind of an added understanding and an expectation of you're going to be contributing to kind of the business development as well. So if you kind of think about, I think they call it like specialist and kind of consulting tracks in big consulting firms. I would say that's kind of the difference. So yeah, I'm in the management consulting group. And then the technical product management, that's the role that I have with my client, is, managing, developing a product with an engineering team.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like, what does that exactly mean?
So what does technical product management mean?
Yeah. Or like, what's the difference between technical product manager and just a normal product manager?
So I think, when it comes to like product and program management, I think there are a lot of different terms that kind of get thrown around. And it really depends on your company and your organization. For me, technical product management was just the best way to describe it. But what I would say is that because I do have a technical background and I do have to have an understanding of the system's architecture, how things work, how data is stored, I am on the more technical side. I have to understand what the product is capable of doing, what we're capable of actually building out, and what my engineering can do in what amount of time. So, which is the reason why I kind of put technical in front of it, because, I think in product management, and again, this really varies, but some companies, like remember when I worked for Visa, they had kind of a product manager who was a business-oriented person who a lot of their work was drawing up requirements, getting metrics together, things like that. But then you also had the technical product manager who was kind of their counterpart, who was working with the development teams. And again, this can also depend on how big your organization is, how big your team is, what the needs are of the day. But for me, what I do is I do the business side as well as the technical side. So, like yesterday, I was drawing up, wireframes of the application and a new workflow we're going to introduce. I was also working on data analytics. I also work with all of the business stakeholders to find out what we want the product to do. I also work on engagement strategy. So I kind of encompass kind of a big chunk, which is what a lot of product managers do. But because I think for me, because I am very deep in the technical aspect of it, I kind of put that, the technical in front of it. But really, it really just depends on your skill set, and what your organization does.
And do you like this more than consulting?
So it's interesting because when I think about consulting, I think about it as a person who has a skill set and they can help you solve a problem. And I think that this is what my skill set is it's really working with engineering teams, technical product, technical program, whatever we want to call it. But yeah, basically working with technical teams to deliver outcomes and working with business people to get those things done. So I think that as a consultant, that is the value that I add. So I'm kind of both,
So when you're working with engineers, are you working with your clients' engineers, or is that actually with AG consulting partners?
So it depends, I think, on your company. Like, for example, when I was at Deloitte, I was working with other engineers who were from Deloitte. It can also be that, maybe your client has, engineers on their end. They can have engineers from another consulting firm that you could be working from. It really varies on what the structure is. But yeah, that's kind of, there are a lot of options of different permutations and combinations that you can have with it.
Okay. So what advice would you give for anyone that's interested in product management?
Read Cracking the PM Interview. That was a fantastic book, which prepared me actually for my consulting interview very well too. I would say that I think a lot of people recognize kind of the similarities between consulting and product management, specifically if you're kind of a technically oriented person. But what I would say is there's no harm in learning how to code. I know there are a lot of people who come into product management from very different places, and I think especially nowadays. there are folks who are, in marketing who go into product management. I think you just have to be creative and have ideas and have an understanding and empathy for other people. I think those are kind of the main aspects. And if you have the technical knowledge too, that really helps. So, totally recommend, learning how to code a little bit. Again, not everybody enjoys it. And there's no reason that you have to put yourself through like an entire Coursera if you don't want to. I would kind of suggest that. And also, cracking the PM interview is really great because it preps you for the interviews. But more than that, I think it also really gives you good frameworks for how to think about things. And product management is one of those, in some ways, it's kind of like a generalist role, where, you kind of have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. But to me, what's the most important about it is the empathy and the understanding your stakeholders and understanding your customers. And then also being able to balance that with, technical constraints, are there financial constraints? You have to be a good juggler and a good project manager in general, I think.
Okay.
To be successful. But then again, I'm still hardly like 2 years into my career. So I'm not the one to be giving the treatise on, how to be a good product manager.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of what's worked for me so far.
Okay. Yep. So for anyone that's coming from either management or technology consulting, like how exactly would that transition be? Would it be like exactly fitting like a glove, or were there some arrangements and changes you had to make to kind of reframe how you were thinking or maybe even interacting with stakeholders?
To be honest, I think there are a lot of similarities.
Okay.
And I think there are certainly some differences, in that when you're a consultant, one of your main thing is to make your client happy, right? So oftentimes, you offer a perspective as a consultant, but ultimately the decision, in a lot of cases, the decision maker isn't always going to be you. It's going to be someone else. And that can happen in product too. But I think when you're, a product manager or a product owner in some capacity, you might have a little more autonomy of making those decisions, in some cases. But yeah, I think in general, there actually are way more similarities than differences. I think it's just, you have to kind of understand how to a product, like what the life cycle is, how is it built, how is it made. And again, you don't have to go into the deep technical weeds, but you have to have some sort of understanding of the life cycle of creating a product, adding features, waterfall versus agile, different agile methodologies. But again, I think no career I don't think product management is as prohibitive as people might think. Okay. There are a lot of different skills that product managers bring to a table, and everything you bring is something useful. So I know that's kind of a very vague answer, but I think you just need to do a little bit of reading, a little bit of learning, and cracking the PM interview. Highly recommend, because that really helps you get in the mindset of what does a product manager do. And talking to product managers is also a really good way to do it. That's what I've done. I have alumni from my school who are in product, and I've been like, hey, tell me about this. Tell me about your job. Tell me about your life. What kind of skills do you use? That's a really good way to go about it too.
Yeah, I remember when I was in college and I was still thinking about like, what should I be doing after college? And I was thinking about product management, like I mentioned before. And honestly, when I think back, I don't really see the difference. But then again, I'm not in product management to know. So I was thinking about like, if I ever wanted to go that route, like how would I do that? But it seems like it's just a matter of finding the right fit of like technical or maybe less technical, and then going right in and doing that.
Yeah, because even if you're thinking about product management, you're still kind of working for a client, right? The customer is your client. And I know there are a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions too about the difference between kind of consulting and product management. And there are so many like blogs and LinkedIn folks out there who talk about this kind of stuff. So I would highly recommend reading up on what they say. Okay. But for me, I think because I came from a technical background, and I went into technical consulting to the point where I was actually doing like technical program management and actually like writing code, to then going into product management. For me, that pathway was pretty, it wasn't too complicated because of kind of that technical background and kind of that understanding of how the background works. But that's not the only path by any means. There are so many different ways to get to it.
So looking forward, long-term or short-term, like what are your goals in your career? Do you think you're going to stay in product management or in consulting or maybe something else?
I kind of, like I said in the beginning, I think I'm kind of accepting the fact that life doesn't always go according to plan. And I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about that as well. Like, do I, want to actually go back into software development? Do I want to continue the product route or the program route? Do I want to stick in consulting or do I want to go into industry? I think it's funny because I think a lot of people, when they kind of get to the kind of end of year 2 of your career, you've done a lot of learning, you've done a lot of exploring, and you're at that point where you're like, do I need to make a decision now about what I do? And I think I've realized the answer is no. I think, life is an ongoing process and you can keep learning and keep growing. So I'm kind of just seeing what comes my way. I think I'm really, really happy being at AG Consulting Partners. The people are awesome. And I really love the client that I'm working with and I love the work I'm doing. So I'm not really in a rush to make any big decisions about what to do next.
Yeah, a lot of people in our age, actually, they're like, oh, you need to jump a different company, different job all the time, just because like, oh, you get an incremental bonus or like a financial bonus or anything like that. But I personally, I really like my job and I feel like I could see myself there long term. And the good thing is that Accenture also has a product management route too. So if I did want to go there, I could and just stay under the same company.
And then that's really great. I think that's the nice thing about being at a really big consulting firm is you can do like almost anything. You just need to kind of, figure out who's the point of contact, chat with them, and then switcheroo over and, figure it out. So that's really great that you have that resource.
Yeah. So you've mostly worked with big companies like Deloitte, Visa, and other big tech clients. How was your experience after shifting to a boutique firm? Because I saw it was like a considerably smaller company compared to all the other companies.
Yeah, so definitely there are a lot of changes. And I think the thing that, there are obviously pros and cons, and it really depends on the kind of person you are. I've actually had a really wonderful time. I feel like, one of the things I really enjoy about working at AGCP is that the leadership is actually very accessible. And they actually, when you're in a big consulting firm, the leadership is, there are like 20 people between you and leadership. And for me, there's only like one. So that's kind of cool. And they're so experienced and so awesome, and you can learn so much from them. And they're really like open to like having calls and just like chatting and, being there and cheering you on in your career. So I think that's really great. Kind of that open door policy that you have. I think the other part of it that kind of goes along that same route is that I went to the University of Washington, which is like 50,000 students, I think. And then, going to Deloitte, which was like, I don't even remember how many people are at Deloitte. Fun. But I think it was kind of getting visibility and being like, oh yeah, I know who Shaarika is. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel so popular. Like, that never have happened at such a, maybe 20 years down the line, it could have happened at a bigger firm. But I think you get a lot of visibility and mobility. And I think, one of the things I'm really passionate about is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, I've been able to kind of bring that to my leadership team and be like, hey, this is something I'm really passionate about. Can we make this happen? And then you chat with them, you bring them a proposal, and they're like, yeah, go for it. Let's see where this goes. So I think there's a lot of kind of impact that you can have as well. But yeah, I think overall for me, I think the other part of it too was that, when I was at Deloitte and again, loved Deloitte, like there's no, like I have absolutely no, negative thing to say about Deloitte. But one thing that I think people might take into consideration as they get older, like, if you get married or have children or have a dog, things like that, is that, there was a lot of traveling with Deloitte. I was gone every single week, and you kind of cram your personal life into kind of 36 hours. And I'm sure you've had that experience too, when you're traveling. And, I was fine with it because I was like, I'm young. I live at home with my parents. I don't have any big responsibilities to take care of. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine doing this. But the nice thing I think with coming to a smaller firm was also that, I felt like I had my life back a little bit in some ways, where I was like, okay, I'm coming home at the end of every day, 5 p.m. I turn my computer off and I can go watch a movie. I can go meet up with a friend. Obviously right now, we have to be a little safer about that kind of thing. But I definitely felt like there was kind of that there was a human element, like a human-centric element. And not to say that a big company doesn't have that, but I think it's, because all of the humans know each other at the company. Yeah. And, I don't know, and there's a lot of really wonderful things about it. But at the same time, I am really glad that I started my career at Deloitte because, I knew that I wanted to start at a big company, regardless of, whether that was product management or, consulting, because I really, really wanted to be solidly trained. Mm-hmm. And I think that a big company where there's lots of structure is a really great place to do that. And I'm so glad that I did it. And there's so many resources, so many trainings, so many programs. So you can really learn a lot and specialize a lot. Like you were just talking about how there's a product management track for you. And that's amazing so that, you can learn that, mm-hmm. Whereas in the smaller company, you may not have all of that.
Yeah.
And I think because, I was, a little further on in my career when I joined a smaller firm, that for me, that wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah. I was pretty comfortable with what I was capable with and what I could do. And, we do have an education stipend too. So, if mm-hmm. there's something that you want to learn or get better at, you have the ability to do that. So yeah, I think it depends kind of on what kind of person you are. I think, I tend to be pretty good at adapting to different environments. So I have found that, being at a smaller firm has been actually a really nice thing. And it's a nice kind of refreshing change. So I've really appreciated it, but I still love Deloitte. Like I'm so grateful for the experience that I have. And I totally think that everyone should do consulting as their first job because it teaches you so much. And it really helps you come into your own and become more responsible. So I think, good experience. I had a wonderful experience with both. Nothing negative to say about either, honestly.
So I remember because before I even joined Accenture, all of my companies were small. They were either startups or small companies. Not a single one was as large as Accenture. So I had the same exact feeling like, should I go to a boutique firm? Because the internship I had before I graduated was actually at a boutique consulting firm. So I was like, should I stay or should I go to a bigger company? And that was kind of like the dilemma I had was if I stay, I would be focusing more on data analytics. I kind of pigeonhole myself if I did that. If I went to a company like Accenture, I could expand myself to do other things. And I'm glad I did because I'm doing something completely different than data analytics right now.
Yeah. I think, and I think also you're allowed to make, decisions about your career, at any point that you want to. Sometimes, people feel like they got a sign, mm-hmm. When a recruiter reached out to them, I think it's, really, really up to you about how mm-hmm. you want to define your career. I think, back in, maybe our parents' day, it was more of a, you stayed at one company for your entire life. And that was pretty common. But I think, nowadays people, understand that people want different experiences. And I know something interesting about consulting too, is that they actually really enjoy when their people go into industry because mm-hmm. then they have a connection as well, a contact they can work with to, drive business development or just, they can get really good in industry and then come back and offer it as a consulting service. So mm-hmm. I think consulting tends to have a pretty high turnover rate and it's very, very flexible. Mm-hmm. So personally, I don't think, and people know that consultants are like at top of their game kind of people too. And I think, a lot of, job descriptions, if you look, I had a friend who was searching for a new job and we were looking at them and a lot of them said has this many years of experience or, 2 years of management consulting experience. And I was like, because they know when you're a consultant, like you have your firm life, you have your, your client life, you have an expertise, you know how to influence without authority. They're like all of these really great skills that consulting teaches you, which is why I think that like every person should do it as their first job. That's just me.
Yeah, I say that to everyone too. It's like even if you don't know what you want to do, if you go to a big consulting firm, you could still jump around, do all these projects, and then really find what you really like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. And I think like we were just talking about is there are pros and cons to being at a small firm and a big firm. And I think, you roll with what works best for you. Yeah. Thankfully I had a great experience of both. So it wasn't really like oh man, or anything like that. I feel really grateful that I actually had the experience of working with both. And I love kind of sharing with other people kind of what that can look like. And based on who you are and what you're interested in, you figure out what works for you.
Mm-hmm. So you briefly mentioned that you were very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, that you even went to leadership at AGCP about that. So can you tell me about, like, did you have a particular story that drives your passion, or is it because of maybe the story you mentioned earlier where your family was trying to drive in that, like, love your culture, stick to it, and really embody it? So I'm curious, like, where is that passion coming from?
So I grew up in a neighborhood, kind of like I mentioned very early on, which is pretty homogenous and pretty well off. So there isn't, sometimes there's a little bit of a distance with reality that I found when I was growing up. And there was also kind of several occasions on which it was made, that point was made to me to make me feel like I didn't belong there because I was like one of 2 brown people, I think, in my entire school at one point. So that was, I think, the stuff that comes with that definitely dealt with people, calling me a terrorist, definitely dealt with people telling me that I was unattractive because I didn't have blonde hair, blue eyes, like had those experiences, plenty of them, and definitely, dealt with a lot of ignorance towards, what my own culture was, and towards, other cultures in general. And I think one thing that really taught me was it made me upset, but it also made me really determined to educate people.
Okay.
And I found that, by educating people, you get actually a pretty decent response in terms of like, oh, I never thought of things this way. And that's kind of the way that I like to approach it. Now, that doesn't mean when something like really messed up happens, you don't report it. Of course you do. That's unfortunately I had to deal with that as well. Was some pretty awful cases of kind of racism or comments made against me, things like that. But I think that kind of experience, and I think a lot of people of color, people LGBTQ folks, people of different identities, who maybe are not kind of the whatever the typical is in their neighborhood or in their environment, deal with that. And it really sucks. But I think it makes you really tough. And for me, I remember, growing up, a lot of, kids of color would even kind of, that whitewash kind of thing. They would kind of, whitewash themselves at school so that they didn't have to feel like they were the other or experience that. And I completely, I get it. But for me, I just remember, because like you said, I grew up being so loud and proud of my culture and my heritage. That was not something I was willing to do. And I was like, I shouldn't have to. Nobody should have to. Nobody should have to feel like they can't bring their full self to school or their whole self to work. That makes no sense. So I think that's kind of why diversity, equity, inclusion have been super important to me growing up, and especially in the current moment with everything that's going on. And I think I'm glad that people are actually seeing the issues in the way that a lot of other people have been experiencing them, because I know a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I've never seen racism, I don't think it exists. It's like, well, but just because you haven't experienced sexism or racism or homophobia, good for you, but that doesn't mean that other people aren't experiencing it. That doesn't mean that there are these severe systemic problems and these biases that we have. Right. And I think that's kind of, it's a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have, but I think it's a really important one. And I think it is important to, like, for me, I really like to take it from the space of education and, hey, did you ever think about it this way? Did you ever think about from, this person's perspective? So I think because, kind of growing up with dealing with a lot of the negativity that came along with being someone who didn't feel like they belonged, and kind of coming into my power as kind of a young woman, I think, and seeing just all the inspirational people that are out there, I think that kind of really, I've always been passionate about it. And that kind of spurred me, I think, to, say, hey, let's start doing more stuff in this area or that area. So I think it's kind of, it's a combination of that, my upbringing, my parents have being like, be proud of who you are, know who you are. And then the difficulties that I had to face because of who I was, kind of combined, that made me really passionate about it.
Yeah. So you mentioned this briefly before, but what do you think is something that the world could do more in terms of DEI initiatives?
I think that there's an aspect of kind of learning how do we take the best kind of action in these kinds of situations. I think, of course it's important to, share, your, how you feel, but I think there's also a lot of listening that needs to be done. I think, just for me, even just because like I'm, a woman of color doesn't mean that I understand what every single other minority is going through. It doesn't. Exactly. I don't. So something that's really important to me always is listening. And when I have something to share, that pertains to, my culture or my, background, I'm happy to share it. But I think one thing that's really important to me is making sure that we listen to other people and try to understand why other people feel the way they feel, instead of kind of dismissing it, and then engaging people of different backgrounds of, how do we bring solutions? How do we make this better? That's something that I think, and I think a lot of people, again, with, the murder of George Floyd, that it's really come to light, a reality that, Black Americans have known, that many people have known for a very long time. It's just, we've just had, an awakening, which, for some people it's like, well, you guys are like 500 years too late, but, it's progress, I think. And I appreciate that people are opening their eyes a lot more, and that people are understanding things a lot better than perhaps they did before, and are also open to realizing when you made a mistake. Like I've certainly made mistakes. I've certainly said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing at a certain time. Nobody is perfect. And I think it's when you make that effort to be like, okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake and I want to learn from it. I think that's what's really, really important, is making that genuine action, genuine effort, and not just being, trying to, cover it up, I guess.
Yeah, I think with a lot of companies trying to do a lot more hiring in diversity, that can help a lot more, because I know a lot of companies, a lot of countries, states, cities, whatever, they're super segregated. They're all in their little bubble. So they don't actually know until something happens. So really, especially with the power of social media, everyone's listening to these stories. And I don't even think like 20 years ago, you could do that, to really hear about all these stories without looking at the newspaper.
Yeah. And social media, I guess there's the whole, it's a very powerful tool, and it can be used for a lot of good, but it can be used for a lot of not so good. So it's important to be aware of what you're consuming, and see, is this credible or not. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting time that we're going through right now. There's a lot of awakenings, I think, and I think especially even in the business world, I think there's been an awakening of empathy. Especially because, of, people like me are, losing loved ones in a pandemic. People are losing their jobs. People are losing their homes. People don't have food that they can put on the table. I think people are learning to listen to each other and be a little more empathetic towards each other. And I hope that that's a trend that continues.
So as a woman in tech, have you had any particular experiences where you were treated differently or unfairly, either in your past firms or currently, or not even in tech, but as a woman?
I think just, that's unfortunate thing. That's something that just happens. And I feel like you just have to expect it and deal with it, unfortunately. And you speak out about it too. You don't want to sit silently, but, I think there was this wonderful article that I read in college about how technology is a boys' club. And there definitely can be a vibe like that from time to time. I remember, when I was taking, even when I was taking like computer science classes in college, there was women got really infantilized. And it was rather frustrating. And I don't know, there's just, it can sometimes be frustrating because we feel like when you're a girl, you have to be even more successful or more this, more that, just to prove something. And I think for me, I've definitely had those experiences where I felt like I've been underestimated by someone because of whatever, I guess what I look like. I'm, 5'4", little girl, I guess, which is annoying and really frustrating. And I've definitely had times where I actually succumbed to that too, where I had people who told me, this isn't for you, or, this is so difficult, like, oh, honey. And I actually, I listened sometimes, and it really shook me to the core, where I got to the point where I had to sit down and write code, and I wanted to cry because there's this really brilliant TED talk, I think by Reshma Saujani, and she talks about how women are taught to be perfect. And they are taught to, don't try if you're not going to do it exactly right. Yeah. And I have never felt more understood in my life when I heard that. Whereas men are taught to, be bold and, get out there, do your thing. And even in a different article I read, I forget what the author's name is, but it talks about how also, historically women were taught to be very multifaceted. Yeah. And, you had to know, if we want to go back to, the really traditional stuff, you had to know how to sew, you had to know how to cook, you had to know how to paint, like all these things. And you had to know how to socialize. There were all these things that women were expected to know how to do. And then for men, it was kind of just like, well, you have to be able to get a job and feed your family. And it was like, there's this huge difference. Yeah. So in the article, they talk about how the environment of technology is not always welcoming for women, because there's this idea that you need to be writing code 24/7 or you're not legit. And that really exists. It's like, if you are not working on 24 side projects, you're not legit. And that can be really frustrating to deal with. And, not just for women, but for even people who have like hobbies outside of work. Yeah. You don't have to be doing your profession all the time. Like, I love pursuing music, and I have a really dear friend who, he can write amazing code, but he's also an amazing singer, and he loves performing, things like that. So I think, and again, I guess that's coming to the kind of humanization of work, is that recognizing that people have a full life. And I think people should be more encouraged to have a full life rather than just kind of work home. And I think, being a woman in tech, there is, unfortunately, it's one of those things where you do have to build a thick skin, and you have to, I think a lot of girls and their moms, or, girls and their parents, have conversations about, you're a woman, here's a list of things that you're going to experience, and you need to be prepared for it. I definitely had that conversation with my parents. Whereas, with my brother, maybe they had to have a similar conversation, but it was a different one. Whereas, he's a big brown guy. So they had to say, when a cop comes to your car, you put your hands up and you get out and you follow every single thing they say to a T. A lot of Black and brown men had that conversation with their parents. And it's so normalized, because it's like you're just like, well, this is how the world is. And I think, there's an understanding of, you always have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Yep. And I don't think that, women and, people of other minorities are an exception to that, unfortunately. But what I will say is, I do think the world is going to keep changing, and I think it's going to keep getting better. So.
Yeah, when you mentioned about your family having all these expectations on you, I was like, oh, that sounds like my family, because they were actually, specifically more my mom, because she's from China. She's like literally from there. So a lot of her ideals were, Christine, you need to be the typical Chinese woman, white skin, and be very fragile, very delicate. But then I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm doing tech. And she was like, you're going to fail in tech because only boys are there. I'm like, oh, it's a boys club. But to me, it was just a rebellious side of me that came in like, I don't care. I'm doing it anyways. I'm going to prove you wrong. So that was like kind of like why I ended up pursuing tech, which honestly, thinking back, that's like a horrible mentality. But at the end of the day, it was really proving myself, because if I had to prove someone else, it means that I wasn't completely confident myself. So going into tech is just like a different way of really expressing yourself. And when I realized like I found my place, I was like, I don't need to prove anyone else. I could just prove myself that I am doing exactly what I want to do.
Yeah, and that's I feel like that's very common in Asian communities. For me, actually, luckily my parents were never like, you're a woman, so you have to do this. It was more when it came to those conversations, they were like, you're gonna have to work harder. You're gonna have to be more confident than you feel. It was kind of like a, you have to, because you're a girl, you're going to deal with extra trash coming your way, and you need to be ready for it. And I think that, a lot of parents have conversations like that with their kids. I mean, thankfully, my parents are Indian and they came from India, but they grew up in very progressive families. So I think kind of the idea, in my culture, in Kashmiri culture, women are actually like expected to, be like professionals as well. It's a very common thing that, like when my aunts are all like professors and they all do these amazing things. And then there's the double standard too. In a lot of cultures where it's like, you have to be an amazing professional and amazing in your career, but you also have to like know how to cook and do all of these things. And I think I feel like I got really lucky with the parents that I have, because they were kind of like, you need to make your life what you want it. You need to be able to provide for yourself and take care of yourself. And, that's kind of, where you need to be independent and stand on your own feet. And you have to be ready for dealing with what comes your way, which is, I think, why a lot of kind of teaching us meditation, yoga, all of those spiritual practices was also really important to them, because they were like, you need to have grounding. And the culture aspect too was, we want you to have a very strong idea of who you are, and what your heritage is. So I feel like it's different. And I think Asian families too, when you're coming from a country of 1 billion people, the concept of, you need to survive is huge. And I'm sure, you experienced that as well, where it's like and I feel like, and in some ways, when I talk about kind of the issues that I talk about, sometimes other immigrants will be like, we get it, but, we're just trying to put food on the table. And I feel like because my parents struggled so much to get me to where I am today, I feel like I have a responsibility to speak out, because they worked their butts off so I could have the platform that I have. So, I'm going to use it, and not everybody is going to agree with you all the time. That's okay. And some people, might say is, you're picking on the little things. Let's look at the big picture. But I think, that's part of creating a dialogue, right? Is there are different opinions, different people coming to the table. And, I don't want to keep my head down.
Yeah. That's actually one of the main reasons why I even created a YouTube channel, because everyone, when they think of a management consultant, they probably think about a white male, but they never really think about like a woman of color. So that's why I was like, okay, I'll do a technology consulting. I'll be in the financial industry. So, that's even more male dominant. And so from there, I just wanted to show people it is possible to be a woman of color, or not even just a woman of color, a minority in technology consulting or in consulting or in STEM. So that was just something that I really wanted to do, that you're not alone, because I'm seeing a lot of consultants out there that they're talking about their careers and everything, but if you are not necessarily a woman of color, I can't necessarily relate, because we deal with different hurdles.
Yeah. And I think sometimes also when people don't understand your hurdles, or they haven't experienced it themselves. Like, a lot of people will say, I don't think there's, homophobia out there. And it's, it's like, well, it's amazing that you haven't dealt with it, or you haven't seen it. That's wonderful, but it does exist. A lot of times, when it comes to, these biases, everybody has biases, and, and the thing is you recognize them, and then you make effort to change them. So I think that I hope that there is a movement of empathy and understanding other people and listening to each other that's starting. And I hope that continues.
Right. So I think that we had a really good conversation. I definitely learned a lot more to you, especially your story as a Indian woman and growing up and whatnot. I honestly did not know about the whole like meditation yoga, that's actually one of the reasons why it started everything. But that definitely makes sense now that all the pieces come together. But what exactly is on the horizon for you in 2021?
Keep learning, keep growing. I think that, there's, like I said, I had kind of my life plan shaken up when I lost my job in the pandemic. And then I got a realization of the things that were really important when we lost some loved ones in the pandemic. So I think just remembering what's important is to, you're not always going to be, happy in life. But remembering that, if you are, doing okay 51% of the time, you're probably doing pretty okay. And being grateful for what I have. So I think on the horizon is just, continue learning, living, growing, and just, being grateful and being happy kind of with what I have. Now, that doesn't mean that if you, want to make your change in your life, you don't do that. Of course you do. I started doing a Chloe Ting challenge because I was like, okay, I have not been exercising. And I was like, I don't feel like myself in my body. So I decided to make a change and I went ahead and, started exercising again, which has been amazing. But yeah, I think what's on the horizon is I'm for the first time in my life, I think I'm pretty comfortable with saying I don't know. And yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm just going to keep rolling with what comes next.
Wow. So where can we exactly find you on social media?
It's so funny. I feel like this is so weird for someone our age, but I am not a social media person at all. Like I do it for work sometimes. But I'm actually like, I don't have an Instagram. I don't have a Twitter. I'm like an anti-millennial. But I'm on LinkedIn. So you can find me at Shaarika Kaul on LinkedIn. But I don't post anything. Honestly, I am the worst on social media. I will like follow people and I'll read up on people and I'll read what they're doing, but I never post anything and I never like do anything on social media. So social media may not be the best place to find me. But you're welcome to like message me on LinkedIn or anything. That's cool. I'm fine with that.
All right. And lastly, what can we do to support you?
Send good vibes. That's really the best. I think, just again, I keep hitting on this concept of empathy. I think just be kind to one another, and be, compassionate, and be willing to have tough conversations. And that's just for everyone. That's not even, just with me, but yeah, as much positivity as you can send me would be great as well. And if you would like to purchase Mindful Mansi because you like it, that would be great too. But yeah, that's the main ways you can support me.
Okay. Thank you so much. And all of the links will be down below. Even though she has LinkedIn, definitely hit her up, connect with her, all of that, and buy her book. So thank you so much. Definitely loved your story. It was one of those things where I knew I was going to get a good story out of you. I just wasn't sure where it was going to head, but definitely very excited that I was able to hear everything. And of course, I'm pretty sure you're going to have a big story coming up soon for all of the future ventures you're going to do. I'm really excited for all of the cool things you're doing. Even though you don't post on LinkedIn, we'll see. Maybe you'll post something when something does happen.
Maybe someday. Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm just the worst on social media. Like I still like call people on the phone and I'm like, hi, how are you doing? I'm like grandma who calls you every other day.
That's how I feel with TikTok.
Yeah. Oh my, TikTok is just like beyond me. I have some really dear friends who are like a little bit younger than me, and she's like always like posting like her TikTok dances and recipes, and I'm like, you go, girl. I love it. But thank you so much for having me. It was so great chatting with you again after such a long time. Thanks for the support and thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much.